Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the New Deal. This will be on your quiz and your test. Make sure that you write what's in black, and let's get started. So we talked about FDR yesterday, and we left off with him winning the election. So as you well know, FDR was a president that's going to serve 4 terms. Now, he was truly somebody who a lot of Americans felt very confident in during wartime, but he will die into his 4th term. But a lot of people usually think about that whenever they talk about FDR. Anyway, so whenever he wins the election in a landslide, he decides that he needed basically this group of what was academic advisors. And these advisors, known as the Brain Trust, they wanted to develop some sort of economic plan that could become really the backbone of the New Deal. And it's going to take a lot of different people that are helping him out. Mainly, you're going to see that the one person that's at his side politically is going to be his wife, Eleanor. So you don't have to write this right here, but this is actually the Brain Trust. These were people who were essentially specialists in different areas. You had a Secretary of Commerce, Treasury, another close advisor, Secretary of State, founder of the Brain Trust, White House counsel, agricultural economist, because that was a big part, and the first female Secretary of Labor being Frances Perkins. So they honestly were very helpful to him, and you'll see different aspects from each of their areas that are going to be present in the Brain Trust. But yes, at his inauguration, he declares that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And it's a very powerful speech, and it's one that still Americans look to. So, first 100 days of any presidency are of the most important. And so you have a lot of intense activity coming out where he wants to address issues that were caused by the Depression. So first of all, they want to reform banking. And so what happened was they took a bank holiday. So there had been about a month-long run on banks. And so FDR proclaimed a bank holiday starting on March 5th, and it shut down the banking system. And the idea is that they could rebuild confidence in the banking system and to stabilize it, really. So they declared a 4-day bank holiday, and it kept all banks shut down until Congress could truly act. Banking transactions were suspended, and except for making change, which wasn't really affected in the grand scheme of things. So whenever the holiday was ended, what they would do is these banks could only accept deposits. People were not allowed to take money out and hoard cash, really, even if it was theirs. So whenever the banks reopened, you had people who wanted to deposit money standing in line. So along with this, you do see his fireside chats. Basically, he wanted to reassure the public that changes were being made and we're going in the right direction. And so he used the radio as the medium to really speak to the American people. So then you have an extremely important piece of legislation. Put a star beside of this. This is the Glass-Steagall Act. Basically, you see 2 main pieces that are a part of the Glass-Steagall Act. You establish the FDIC. This is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And this makes sure that your deposits are secure. If you go to the bank, oftentimes you'll see like a FDIC sticker, and that's what it's talking about. That's what it's referring to. Still in place today. Excuse me. And then you also have the SEC, which is meant to basically regulate the stock market, to protect investors and maintain a fair and orderly function of the market. Now, I'm not going to have you write down all of these. And the main point, the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to have you guys fill out a chart, and that's going to be your assignment for today. So the New Deal programs, these are referred to as alphabet soup programs. And they are meant to address different areas where people were struggling. So we'll just go through and talk about them. You had the AAA, which was, and you can see through here, let's see if this works. There we go. Why it's called alphabet soup programs. So you had the Agriculture Adjustment Act. Basically, what it was meant to do is control like the production and prices of crops, and also giving subsidies or money to farmers who stayed under their set quotas. Remember, overproduction was one of the major issues that led to the Depression. So essentially it made available, millions of dollars to help farmers meet their mortgages as well. And government actually bought livestock. Sorry. The government bought livestock for slaughter, and they paid farmers, not to plant on part of their land. So there are a lot of aspects there. Then you had Tennessee Valley Authority. Basically, they built dams for flood control and hydroelectric power in the Tennessee Valley, and created projects to combat erosion and deforestation that was really threatening the industry. You have the CCC, which is the Civilian Conservation Corps. So this was to create jobs. Sorry, I meant to go through this here. But the idea here for the AAA and the TVA, that's to help rural areas. For these two that we're speaking of, it's to create jobs. And so they're putting people to work to help the environment. Like for different state and federal park projects for, conservation, planting trees to combat erosion, building bridges. So those are, important things. Then you have public works administrations. They built large scale, like public works projects, also like hospitals and schools, and then, bridges like with the CCC. And there you can see that the economy does see a benefit from it. Now, to reform business and banking, we talked about the FDIC and the SEC. Here you have the NRA, not the National Rifle Association, but the National Recovery Administration. They wanted to promote economic recovery by ending wage and price. And they wanted to restore competition. And this entire thing was meant to help the banking industry. You also see the CWA. We're going to go through more of them with your chart, and we'll go over it later. But just for the purpose of today, we're just going to quickly go through it. So for the CWA, you can see down here, this is actually a picture during the time. They use a lot of manual labor for these different jobs. And what's interesting is this put a lot of people to work. And even if it was, back-breaking, difficult work, they still wanted those jobs. All right, so there are going to be a lot of people who, see relief from these different programs, but the issue is the economy is still going to be struggling after some time. So there are a lot of people that are upset about deficit spending. Basically, spending to prime the pump of the economy to get things moving whenever you're already in trouble. Like your economy is struggling and it's not growing. And then this is when deficit spending is over, you are spending more and more money. And so people didn't see that this would be, a good fix. There are three main people to talk about here. You have Father Charles Coughlin, a religious man who felt that the wealthy needed to be taxed heavily and that money could go to different government programs and government assistance. You have Huey Long, who is a senator from Louisiana, who wants to level the income. And you can kind of think about really where that's going to go. We'll talk more about Huey Long later, but just for today, I'll have that down. And Francis Townsend was one of the key pioneers of trying to institute an income for the elderly, because the elderly and children were really struggling during this time, and oftentimes they were left behind as far as in society. Now, FDR was quite controversial. So whenever he was trying to get different New Deal programs, this was his baby. This was his plan for progress. Whenever he was trying to get a lot of these programs passed, conservative justices on the Supreme Court, they strike it down. And so what he tries to do in order to keep his legacy, going forward, keep what he wants, he tries to get Congress to allow 6 more justices to be put on the Supreme Court, so it would be a lot easier for his programs to get passed. Now, people called this court packing. He was trying to pack the court with more and more people who saw like he did. And basically, a lot of people are not happy about that because they think that it's a threat to our checks and balances. And they think that he's trying to gain more power than he should. And so eventually people retire, and like throughout his super long term compared to everyone else, those retirements allow people to come in, and he can appoint more people who are like-minded and more liberal. So let's talk about the second New Deal. After, with the election of 1936, you could take a look at this map here. You can see that it is another landslide. The economy is growing at this point, yes, but it's not recovering as quick as what people wanted to see with all these changes and all the spending. Unemployment's very high, but he still does win re-election, and you see the beginning of his second New Deal. So you will answer these on the chart, but let's just go ahead and talk about some of the alphabet soup programs. We went through every single one of them. Oh my gosh, it would take forever. Anyways, so here we're going to talk about the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, definitely the biggest of the alphabet soup programs. Basically, you saw that it was an employment and an infrastructure program. It was around for roughly 8 years and put over 8 million Americans to work, which was definitely a good thing that they saw. And they would build things like buildings, hospitals, sewer lines, bridges, airfields, all kinds of very useful things. And something that comes around during this time is the Social Security Act. I know you've heard people talk about Social Security before, maybe in your family, whatnot. It provided pensions or money that's going to be given to the elderly, people who are unemployed, people who have families with children that are struggling. So this was beneficial for a lot of Americans. Here you have the NYA, National Youth Administration, basically to help provide education for young people. FDR believed that, and there were people along with FDR, but he is noted for saying that they have to have their chance in school if they want to be an apprentice and learn a trade, and they need to have a chance to work and earn for themselves. And so they would help 2 groups of people, youth, like your kids who were in school but needed financial assistance in order to be able to continue going, or people who were out of school and unemployed. So you had different age groups there too. If you were eligible, you'd have to be from 16 to 24, or for the second group of people, 16 to 25. So also remember that unions, we talked about unions for quite some time and how you've seen a decrease in union activity. People essentially labeled them as socialists, and there were a lot of issues there. And during the war, union activity decreased because striking was looked down upon in a major way, to put it lightly. And if you were striking and not working, you were not producing things to help the war effort. So labor activity had decreased a lot. And so FDR wanted to bring back a lot of that activity there. And so in defending workers' unions, you have the Wagner Act, also known as the National Labor Relations Act, wants to protect rights of workers if they wanted to join a union. And it also opens up for that collective bargaining like we've talked about before. Now, what's interesting is that we've talked about Eleanor Roosevelt already and how she was at the right-hand side of FDR. And so she was very important in like a lot of his decision making and so on. He also appointed the first woman to the cabinet, which is Frances Perkins. You saw her picture at the beginning, and she was the Secretary of Labor. So unfortunately, there were a lot of men who felt that women who were taking, they felt negatively about women taking their spot in the workplace. And so women were able to be paid less, and that was attractive to a lot of business owners and so on. We talked about the New Deal and women during the time. Now we're going to talk about the New Deal and African Americans. So, what was pretty common during the time is, unfortunately, African Americans were often the poorest group of people within the United States. And so they were hit really hard by the Depression. And so you start to see that there is more representation in government, where you have the what's known as the Black Brain Trust or the Black Cabinet. They have a decent bit of a say-so whenever it comes to policy and being the advisors for FDR. And so even with this sort of group of advisors, FDR doesn't really push forward on civil rights like he could have. Unemployment among African Americans is at 50%, which was twice the rate of people who were white. There's still segregation. And if, let's say, a white person and a Black person go and try and get the same job, most often at a very high percent, the white person would be chosen. And so FDR doesn't really support civil rights measures as much because he needs Southern support in order to win the next election and push his legacy through. Regardless, you do see a move of African Americans towards the Democrat Party. So originally, and here's just a little background on that, originally African Americans were Republicans by default. Keep in mind, this was the party of Lincoln. They had just received the right to vote, and the Republican Party at this time was the party of emancipation. So it really starts to transform towards the end of the 1800s and beginning of the 1900s, becomes a party of white-collar workers and business interests and upper-class interests. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time for the party attachment to really form. So they have different messages about civil rights. One step was, we talked about the Great Migration time and time again. Whenever you have those hundreds of thousands of African Americans who are moving to the North for opportunity. They also, at this time, find the New Deal programs attractive because there are a lot of people who are living in these segregated areas that are jobless. And these programs, a lot of the point was to put people to work. So you'll see eventually there's going to be another step with Harry Truman's going to desegregate the armed forces. And there are a lot of steps after, which we'll get to. But we see this move truly begin to come forth. You see a lot of entertainment changes during this time. Some of the things that you may be a little more familiar with, because people want to like escape the troubles of the time. People want to play board games like Monopoly. And, obviously that has kind of a tale of the time to it, really. The radio is very popular. Remember, with the fireside chats, that's the medium that FDR chose. Then you have a lot of key movies that maybe from your childhood. Gone with the Wind was a big one. Snow White. This is when you start to see really Disney movies come forward, and The Wizard of Oz, which we've talked about. So there was an end to the New Deal that came. Whenever FDR takes back and scales back, I guess you could really say, the New Deal programs, unemployment goes back up. You're not putting as many people to work. Whenever things heat up in Europe, as far as with World War II, which we'll start talking about tomorrow, everything, that takes place. Like we talked about the end of progressivism with World War I, how progressivism went on the back burner. This is what happens with the New Deal. The events in Europe take precedence and they're on the front burner. A A lot of people see that the New Deal was a good thing. Others see it as a bad thing. Others see it as that, that deficit spending was harmful to the economy. They think that it was too much government control and regulation. Others think it was great because it put people to work and things like that, reformed banking, stuff like that. But truly, what does fix the economy, and we will talk about this when we talk about World War II, is that World War II rights the economy. It does put people to work, yes, and people have to be able to produce goods for domestic uses and also for the war to use it domestic and abroad. So anyway, there are far-reaching benefits of the New Deal with different programs that are still in place today, like with regulating banks and stock markets, things like that. So that'll be it for today. Tomorrow we are going to begin our discussion of World War II.